Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our April the 19th in Pacific Time US session in our series on entrepreneurship in Asian high-tech industries. I'm Richard Dasher, and I'm very happy to be able to host this series. So we have a hybrid audience. We have Stanford students here in a classroom, and we have people joining us on Zoom for this session about the most recent trends in the entrepreneurship ecosystem in India. And I'm delighted to be able to introduce one of the people that I've known for quite some time. I'm afraid to say how long it is, Ms. Paula Mariwala, who is a well-known venture capitalist in India. She's really been building the ecosystem in India ever since about the year 2006. And I think that my contact with Paula goes at least back that long. She's the founding partner of a relatively new venture capital firm, Aureolis Ventures. She's also the founder and former co-president of Stanford Angels and Entrepreneurs India. She's the managing director of Seed Fund Advisors. She's a promoter director of the Hindutron Group. She also runs the Hindutron Foundation, which does social entrepreneurship support. She has her master's in applied physics from Stanford, and she's also an investor in the companies of both of the panelists that I'm about to introduce. So our next panelist after Paula will be Mr. Gaurav Munjal, who is co-founder and CEO of one of India's large unicorn companies, Unacademy. And Unacademy is actually the leading learning platform in India now. He founded the company in 2010 as a YouTube channel, and the company really launched as Unacademy in 2015. The company became a unicorn in 2020. Gaurav has been on the Forbes 30 Under 30 feature in the year 2018, and another several high-profile publications about young entrepreneurs. He's a serial entrepreneur. His first venture was FlatChat, which was acquired. It was a real estate platform for college students, and it was acquired by commonfloor.com. His background is in computer engineering. So after Gaurav, we'll also hear from Mr. Awais Ahmed. Both Gaurav and Awais are in Bangalore, and Paula is coming to us from Mumbai. So Awais is founder and CEO of a company named Pixxel, Pixxel, which is a space technology company. They're putting up a constellation of small satellites that will do high-resolution hyperspectral imaging. He was a founding member of the Hyperloop India team, which was one of the finalist teams in the SpaceX competition for Hyperloop pods. Remember, this is the high-speed network that Elon Musk is building between Los Angeles and Las Vegas. He also has been a control systems engineer for another space effort, and he has a master's in mathematics. So I'm going to ask Paula if she will take off with some prepared remarks first, and then Paula will introduce our other two panelists. Paula, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Richard. It's always a pleasure to interact with Richard, and he's always up to something interesting. And though it's bright and early here, it's really exciting to be part of the seminar. This is the second time I'm talking about the Indian ecosystem
just so everybody knows, it is 6 a.m. in India right now. So thank you all for coming in so early.
Well, as Richard said, it's exciting times. We have a unicorn and a space tech founder, they're going to share their journey. I'm just going to give a bit of a background about where we are in the startup and early stage investing ecosystem in India, which has produced these kind of entrepreneurs in the last few years. And as I was reflecting on starting this presentation, working on this presentation, I was thinking back, I think it was 2013 or 14, when Richard had reached out to me, and it was in Palo Alto uh, that I spoke to a class, because this, I think hybrid wasn't quite a thing in 2013 and 14. So when I spoke about the ecosystem in India in 2013 and 14, I never thought this is a slide I would present after 7, 8 years. And this is where actually the startup ecosystem has landed today. We are the largest, second largest in Asia by volume for VC funded countries. And while we always knew there was a potential, we knew that there were so many speed bumps along the way that we were not sure that we'll ever reach this kind of a destination that we are today. We are actually third in the world now. I think we've surpassed UK. And really, ranking doesn't mean anything. I think what is heartening is the vibrancy of the ecosystem. And we still have a long way to go. I think there's much potential, as you can see from the numbers, that while we have inched up substantially, and other ecosystems are also going, I think the good news is that we are really out there attracting investors and very innovative founders and companies. Just to give a numbers, what's happened, especially the post-pandemic in the last 2 years, has been a nonlinear growth in startup investments, in innovative companies, really scaling rapidly. In 2020, we had a more than 30% year-on-year growth in just the total amount of investments in India, $30 billion. The number of unicorns, and I think Richard very nicely gave this use the word in the title itself, and it's certainly a phrase that we are using a lot in India. We've had 46 unicorns just in the year 2021, and I think we've already added a few more. So I think we're at 52 now, just over 21, 22, but I think we're close to 90 now in overall. And again, it's not to brag about numbers, right? It's just it's an indicator that we are looking at scale, we are looking at growth, rapid growth. And we have entrepreneurs who are audacious, who are risk takers, who are very, very hardworking, very committed, who are really fueling this. And we have the support of the VC community and a global VC community. We have VCs from all over now, really investing heavily and very big, very supportive of the founders. I think the other important piece is exits. And this was a piece that was really missing a few years ago. We were not really able to talk about very many great exits. And that was sort of making, especially global VCs a bit skeptical. But now, again, over the last couple of years, we have not only had good IPOs, we have had even corporates coming in with acquisitions, which is something that was completely missing. So we can now really talk about meaningful exits, worth a lot of money. And that's, again, exciting for investors like ours. Early stage investors are getting their due. VCs, new VCs and PE funds are also looking at startups as a very, very high return asset class. Again, don't want to harp on the word unicorn too much, but just to indicate how we've had a non-linear growth. When I spoke in 2013 and 14, there was one or two companies that I could talk about, and Flipkart and so on, and just Paytm were just coming on the horizon. But now, if you look at these logos, not only their large numbers in the last 2 years, which is showing the exponential growth, the hockey stick, as we like to say in the VC parlance, but most of these logos have become household names. And I think that is really indicative of the vibrancy of the ecosystem, that we have startups which are now really becoming motivators for younger people, for corporates, for everybody to look at, to disrupt, to really impact India as an economy and Indian citizens, their communities, personal and professional lives. So I think we're seeing a huge impact all across because of many of these companies, which are really, it's very exciting for all of us. I want to just step back and see what are the real, you know, motivators or things which have propelled startups into this realm. I would say the first real reason is digital acceleration or digital transformation. I think technology being in hands of people through penetration of smartphones, and so full credit to not only the government but also to the smartphone technology, the pricing that has come down. We have people like Geo, which give companies like Geo, which have put really affordable smartphones in hands of people across socioeconomic strata in India, and access to data and internet through all the so many different operators. Another key factor is over the last few years, the government, in partnership with our financial institutions and startups, has come up with what we call the UPI infrastructure, which is the payment infrastructure, unified payment infrastructure, which has enabled smartphone users to be monetized, which was a very difficult thing earlier. I remember when we started Red Bus, it was like, how do we collect even small amounts from people? It was cash on delivery. It was messy. We had very poor credit card penetration. Online banking, etc., wasn't there. So I think this whole shift of having this layer of UPI, we pay everybody online now. I mean, it's big acceleration for both these have come, due to the pandemic, where not only is everybody paying online, everybody's buying online, but even companies which may have taken 3 to 5 years to adopt digital, there's been a speedy transformation. They've had to adopt digital, and that has given phenomenal opportunities. Pandemic has had multiple effects. I think people have also become very conscious of climate and environment, and I think that has also led to a lot of innovation in that space, and we will hear from people like Awais about that. In education as well, I think because of everything going online, EdTech has really had a huge impact on how education is being delivered, how it's being innovated, how pedagogy is changing, and how learning outcomes are changing. And again, one of our panelists today, Gaurav, will talk about his journey and how EdTech is changing India as well. Of course, there have been other factors like supportive environment from the government, several initiatives for startup India, the mission as it is called, so for investors as well as founders. We still have a long way to go to provide better ease of doing business, but I think we are at least inching towards that. The changing market dynamics. Again, India has a large population, more than 1 billion people. We've always talked about that, but what's changed now over the last 3 years is that there is an affluent middle class which has grown substantially beyond tier 1 into tier 2 and tier 3 cities. Again, I think Gaurav will touch upon that. It's very aspirational. They're able to spend money. And some geopolitical factors have also contributed, to Indians being more global, more outward looking, and providing some alternate solutions in supply chains across the world. What this has led to is not just a growth in unicorns, but also, I think, in terms of developing completely new sectors which did not exist substantially a few years ago. So, of course, e-commerce was in what we call the very second wave after the software companies and IT revolution made a mark for India. I think the first wave of startups was focused on consumer-led e-commerce, which still continues to grow, but we now also have B2B e-commerce, that's driving up innovation and adoption of technology. Fintech, as I said, has been a huge growth because of the UPI and because of having access. There's healthcare, again, post-pandemic has seen even a bigger growth, and some of the new sectors, I would say, are education, agriculture, and deep tech. Agriculture, again, because of having access to data is really changing the way we do agriculture. But the two sectors I really want to talk about are education and deep tech. And when I started in the VC ecosystem in 2006, we did invest in a couple of, I think, three edtech companies, but we were not able to see the kind of scale we're seeing today at all. I had vowed never to invest as a VC in education. I said I will only support it as a philanthropic thing, not for profit. It doesn't have a model. But lo and behold, we have 6 unicorns in the edtech space. Um, the first investment I did outside of seed fund as an angel was in Unacademy, and in a moment you'll hear from Gaurav. Um, and I was pinching myself, saying, "Am I really doing this?" And it was a hunch. It was really very exciting to see how this has really changed how we do things, and educational outcomes have changed, educational pedagogies are changing, and really very, very exciting times for EdTech. Um, the really new entrant, the new kid on the block is deep tech. We are seeing amazing activity in deep tech. And if you go a little bit deeper, we have mobility, we have climate tech, and we have space tech. I mean, investment in deep tech has doubled, more than doubled in 2021. We have more than 100 companies which got funded, and space tech really has taken off. I think led by changes in the government, key policies of the government. We've seen a huge uptick there with 47 new space startups space tech startups being launched. People like Awais really leading the way, and we will hear from them. And all this has led to really an influx of global VCs. So we have VCs from all over. We also have corporates, multinationals as well as Indian large corporates, who are looking at startups, looking at partnering, looking at investing, looking at acquiring. So again, very, very important to have all these stakeholders. And all these sectors that I talked about, and all these investors who are looking at these sectors, are really, they have the potential to change the quality of life and really creating huge impact. And these are some of the sectors that are driving this impact and this change that we can visibly see, and how we are completely, hopefully, we are going to get into a new orbit for many of Indians and indeed others around the world. Just a quick one on where we stand as early stage investors. I'm involved with Stanford Angel, where we do write the first check primarily. We're sector agnostic, but we are definitely, being Stanford, we are definitely favor technology and technology-led investments. But we do pre-seed and early seed, both Unacademy and Pixxel are the companies we invested in, and we are very proud to be known as investors of Gaurav and Awais rather than as a Stanford group. And that's really how we have made our mark, I would say. And it's been a pleasure working with very, very nice and very, very innovative entrepreneurs. I've recently founded Aureolis Ventures, which is an early stage investment firm, which is going to be focused more on climate change, sustainability, education, and deep tech, and do a little bit more towards seed and series A as well. And again, we're seeing very good deal flow and very interesting entrepreneurs. On that note, I really want to hand it over to our two entrepreneurs that Richard introduced. I met Gaurav in 2016, I think, and he had no business model. He just had great passion, very clear vision, and I knew he's going to change the educational landscape in India. And he's now a unicorn, but he still remains at heart a very passionate entrepreneur who's building a great product and impacting a lot of Indians and soon a lot of global citizens as well. Followed by Awais, who will talk about his adventure in space and the health of his satellite, which has just gone up. So a lot of excitement. I'm going to hand right over to Gaurav to talk about his story. Richard, if that's okay.
I think that's great. I think you can stop sharing your slides and we'll spotlight Gaurav. Gaurav, good morning.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks, Paula, for the introduction. Good evening for the ones who are in the other parts of the world. I think I was, first of all, let me just tell you that how online learning impacted me. I didn't go to a good college. I didn't go to an Ivy League college. I didn't go to IIT. Uh, and I remember that I was fairly passionate about coding. And in the first year, when I go into my college and I realized that um, most of my professors don't know anything, because it's not a good college and the quality of education is really poor. I stumble upon this video lecture series, which is uh, CS 106A from Stanford, programming methodology. Yeah, and it was Professor Mehran Sahami. And I remember that I finished that in the first semester. And then I message him, and fortunately he replies back. And, that's the start of online learning for a 17-year-old kid who just wanted to learn. And this is, and the trigger then was that I didn't have high quality teachers, but online on YouTube, Stanford Engineering Everywhere was a program that Stanford had just launched, and they made their high quality content accessible to everyone. And I think that was fairly life changing, because the amount of learning I had online, and the amount of learning one can have online if one has intrinsic motivation is huge. And then, for the founders of Unacademy, Roman, me, Himesh, the two areas that we were really passionate about were content and product. So Himesh and I had been coding since a long time. I started writing my first piece of code when I was 12 years old in a software in this programming language called QBasic. And Himesh started coding in college, and we started a company together just after college. And Roman and I knew each other from school. And from a content point of view, both Roman and I were writing on YouTube, writing on Quora a lot. Both of us became in the top 20 most followed people on Quora in the world because we were constantly writing. And then we started a bunch of YouTube channels in college. In the third year of college, I started a YouTube channel called Unacademy. This is 2010. And I think I'm 20 years old, 19 maybe, and start this YouTube channel, and done as a side project. No intent to make a business out of it. And in the next couple of years, while the founders of Unacademy are doing different things, the YouTube channel becomes huge. And at one point, even before we started it as a company, it became one of the largest education channels in the country, where it's just Roman and me making videos right now. And we realized the same power through which I learned. I took the course of Stanford in first year, which was really available. And we realized that YouTube historically has not focused on education. And then we read stories like Twitch, which focused on live streaming, gaming, which YouTube was not focusing on then. And then they sold the company to Amazon for like $1 billion. And for us in 2015, like $1 billion was a huge thing. I mean, but we did set a goal, internal goal for ourselves, which was like an informal goal, that we have to build a unicorn before we all turn 30. So we have to have a unicorn in our 20s.
Gaurav, can you tell a little bit about the specific business model that you did come up with then?
Yeah, and I'm coming to that.
Okay.
When we saw that Twitch is something that is focused on gaming, and we have these free videos on YouTube that are getting a lot of traction, can we build a YouTube for education? And at that time, it was not a platform that was making money. It was just a platform which allowed people to create educational content and put it on our platform. And the way we did that was we launched this app called Unacademy Educator app. Unacademy Educator app allowed people to create high quality educational content in a matter of few minutes. okay, let me go back a little. When we were making YouTube content, we used to use this software called Camtasia, and we used to use a screen recorder, and we used to use a Wacom tablet. Now, the first time I tried to convince my co-founder Roman to create a video, the first time I told him to, it took me 6 months for him to start making his first video because he was in Delhi and the softwares were too complicated. So it's only when we met in person that he started making the videos. So the idea that we initially started with was we launched this app called Unacademy Educator app that made it super easy for people to create educational content. We would see the likes of Instagram. We would see, there was this app called Dub Smash. We would see that entertainment apps allow people to create great content with so much ease. And that's how the Unacademy Educator app took off. For the first 4 years, no monetization. We grow from 1 million views a month to possibly 40 million views a month on our own platform and on YouTube. This is the first 4 years. And we do a bunch of experiments. What we realize is that 80% of our views are coming for test prep. It's a very high intent category. People want to crack examinations, etc. And our best teachers are being hired by offline institutes and they're leaving us, even though it's a free platform. So they would gain credibility and status on Unacademy because it had a lot of traction. And then they would get $1 million packages by these offline centers. A test prep teacher in India is probably paid anywhere between $500,000 US to $1 million US. That's how big these celebrities are, because they help prepare people for competitive examinations that change their lives. In 2019, and we were doing a bunch of monetization experiments, but in 2019, we hit PMF when we said, if you're preparing for a particular examination, how about we give you access of live classes of all the top teachers? And see, in retrospect, we did a lot of unconventional, we took a lot of unconventional calls. Our competitors were selling recorded content, but they were doing heavy sales. So our competitors had thousands of salespeople on the street, and our investors, and we had raised a bunch of VC money by then, had suggested that we do the same. But we took a lot of unconventional calls and we said that we are a product company. And if we will solve anything, we will solve it using technology and product rather than being a push sales business. And I think it's then when we launched the subscription model, and it was a little unique because it had not been done before. And
so that's kind of really unusual in a place like India, right?
Yeah.
Subscription is something where people have to make a commitment up front, and that must have been a huge change.
Yes. Let me just and then what happened is that I'll just quickly give you guys a glance. And then what happened is, if you're preparing for a particular examination, you could get access to the entire content of that examination. You could learn from the best teachers, and they would all be teaching live. And we gave everything in one place, whether it's tests, whether it's something else. And this is pre-COVID. Let me tell you about the pre-COVID numbers. We went from 0 to 30 million ARR in Feb 2020 in just 1 year. And this is pre-COVID. So that's how, and we already had a lot of traction because of the free product that we had built so far. And then when we started providing the access to these live classes and teachers as a part of the subscription model, and for some examinations, the subscription was as high as $1,000 per annum. It just took off. And then, COVID came and people realized that we have the best product. So a lot of people try and attribute that we had COVID tailwinds, etc., which is true. We had a lot of COVID tailwinds, but not every edtech player had the kind of growth that we had because we had an underlying great product. We had a product whose NPS was fairly good. And then during COVID, by September 2021, we had crossed 200 million ARR. And this is within 2.5 years of launching our subscription product. So, and because it was product play, we scaled from 1 exam to 60 exams with more than 2,000 teachers in a matter of few months. And at this point, we have 800,000 paid students who are preparing. Just to put this in context, the largest offline institute in the country that has been running for the last 30 years has 200,000 paid students. And the average, people prepare for these exams for 2 years, and the LTV that some of our top exams generate is close to $4,000 in these 2 to 3 years. So this is where we are currently.
So when you say $4,000, that's revenue per user? Is that average?
For our users who are preparing for the top exams. So,
Right.
So we have varied kind of examinations. If you're preparing for bank exam, the subscription would probably cost $15 a month. But if you're preparing for UPSC or IIT JEE, the subscription would cost $120 a month.
So
and recently we just launched in US, and in fact we are at a $2 million ARR from the US market. Very early days, but we launched this exam called USMLE Step 1, USMLE Step 2, NCLX. So these are a bunch of exams that we are launching, and I mean
USMLA, the MLA exam.
Yes.
Is that, okay. So it's test prep.
Yes.
And how do you think that you're going to grow from here?
So I'll talk to you about that. Now, I think test prep business is steady. It should be profitable by September this year, growing 50% year on year. Last year for the whole calendar year, we did around $140 million revenue, and we crossed 200 million ARR in September. This year, we are projected to grow 50% at that pace on the Unacademy product. 8 months ago, and this has been our philosophy from the very beginning, we thrive in chaos. So at any point, we have like 7-8 experiments running. At any point, we have like multiple teams working on R&D and chaos, R&D and experiments. And one of these experiments was this idea called re-level. I didn't go to a good college, but I ended up getting one of the highest paying software jobs because I got into competitive programming like Code Chef or Code Forces. So there are platforms where you can compete with other coders. And if you're doing well, it doesn't matter which college you are from. And I didn't have a Stanford degree. I didn't have a Harvard degree. It didn't matter where you're from. Your score in that test is what matters. Now, in a country like India, the problem, and let's take the test prep market one. And by the way, I was watching this talk by Peter Thiel a year back, and he says that in test prep market in US, especially, is more like a tournament where the final reward is a college. In India, test prep also leads to jobs, by the way. So for example, there are 60 million test takers every year. The market is a $11 billion market growing at 17% CAGR. These 60 million test takers either get into a good college or they get a job. So if you want to be a district attorney in India, you have to sort of give this UPSC exam. and then you get a job. In fact, my co-founder, Roman, had cleared two of these examinations himself. So he's a medical doctor, and he became a district attorney at the age of 23, assistant district attorney. So we had this background. And then coming back to the new project that we are doing, one of our experimental 0 to 1 ideas was how CodeChef and how that coding platform changed my life. What if, see, our belief is that except the top 3% college, 97%, and India has a lot of engineering colleges, probably like 100,000 engineering colleges. Except the top 3%, the IITs, the IIMs, and the NITs, 97% of college.
Out of chat. Thank you. Sorry about that. Yeah, sorry. Would you kind of say what you just said again?
Yeah. So, there's this book called Competing Against Luck by Kristen Clayton, and he has this jobs to be done theory. And if he says that if you buy a product, you're basically hiring a product to do a job. So if we see college as a product, the college has two major jobs for us. One is to make sure that we get good education that can help us in life. And second is to help provide placements. Except the top 3% colleges, 97% colleges do a shitty job of providing either education or placements. And that's when we launched this product around 7-8 months back called Relevel. We essentially created our own test prep. We said, if you want a private sector job, and by the way, there are government jobs for which exams already existed. We said, if you want a private sector job, give our exam, give our test that we have created. It's our branded test, and we are not doing it with any company. It's a Relevel branded test. And if you clear this test, you will get a job, and the test is free. We launched this product 6 months ago. Last month, 300,000 people appeared, 300,000 people registered for the test with a 100% placement rate for people who have cleared the test. And those who are not clearing the test are buying courses from us. And, we are at a $10 million ARR in this product in 6 months. Okay. So this is our next level of growth, while Unacademy will focus on profitability, and it will be like a steady 40-50% year-on-year growth business.
Well, we really appreciate you taking the time to give these kind of remarks and background. I hope you can stay around for the remainder of the session, because we'll have a lot of questions, I'm sure. First, though, I'd like to turn it back over to Paula. Paula, our second entrepreneur that you're introducing us to today is in deep tech. Why don't I ask you to talk a little bit about how you got to, how you met Awais and what made you interested in his company?
So I think I was introduced to Awais about in 2020, early to 2020, or maybe late 2019, as a very young engineering student from BITS Pilani, which is very well-known institution where Funny as well studied as well. And as you know, Richard, I have a background in applied physics. I actually taught astrophysics at Stanford in the observatory upstairs, up on the hill. So when I heard that there's a young chap making a satellite and he wants to launch the satellite, and he has he's using hyperspectral imaging and has built a camera. I mean, that had all tick marks in my brain. And I said, well, let's at least meet. I just thought it's a kid with a project. I never really thought that Awais Ahmed would be sitting here with so much funding in his bank, honestly. I said, let's see what he has. And I just had a conversation. I thought it was interesting. I wasn't sure that, the satellite launching is going to be permissible, is that ISRO is going to allow this. I was not really following on the regulatory part. But when I spoke to him, he was a very young chap with a very clear vision, with a lot of passion for the technology and very clear thinking. So I actually, because he was in Bangalore, I introduced him to one other Stanford Angels member, who was leading the deal team in Bangalore, Anshuman, who is again a seasoned serial entrepreneur, and he talked to Awais. Both Anshuman and I are very passionate about climate, and we were ideating how to bring climate into our portfolio and look for entrepreneurs. And Anshuman met him and called me back and said, "I think we have our entrepreneur. Let's support him." So we committed to supporting him, and we asked him to pitch to our group. And in the meanwhile, I think he got a lot of interest from other investors. So I think we thought it would be a small round, became a big round, and then I think the rest is history. And I think he has a satellite up, and I hope the satellite is doing well. He built the camera, and it was great to see. As he was building, we would have updates, and he would show us what it's looking. And he built it through the pandemic and launched it just at the end of the pandemic. So very interesting story. So let's just hear it from him, Awais.
Thanks for that, Paula. I think that was a little too kind, and thank you, Richard, and everyone for having me here. It's a pleasure to be speaking. So I think, when we started Pixxel, this was early 2019, and even though the startup ecosystem was taking off, it was predominantly for the startups that were working on bits and not atoms. So there's this dichotomy in startups. There are startups working on bits, which is predominantly software, where people see high margins and things like that, and also relatively easier. It's never easy building a company, but compared to building hardware, and then we were working in the atom space, and there were hardly anyone that could back us. So that's sort of when we started, but it was never that we wanted to create a company or start a startup that led to Pixxel. I think there were a few things that led to it. So let me just set a little bit of context. I'd always loved space as a kid. I think a lot of us do. Everyone of us is fascinated by looking at the skies, astronomy, telescopes, and I was no different. But I grew up in a small village with no access to any of these. But the skies always fascinated me. My father was very particular about education, even though we were from a very small town, getting these encyclopedias about the universe and the solar system. So that, I think, created that love for space. And I very seriously wanted to be an astronaut as well. There were two pathways that I chatted out. One was you can become an Air Force pilot and a commander, and then that's one way of becoming an astronaut. And then the second way is become really good at a field of science that requires experimentation in space, and you can do that as well. But as an Indian, there are not a lot of opportunities to do that. But I think things started to change once I joined university, BITS, the Birla Institute of Technology here. And there were two very specific experiences that led to Pixxel. I think one was being part of the student satellite team that was working directly with the Indian Space Agency. We've had a very vibrant space ecosystem here in the country, thanks to ISRO, the Indian Space Research Organization. They've been working for the past 7 decades or so now. And it's one of the top 3 or 4 space agencies that's working in the world on space missions. And it's known for doing things very cost effectively. So working with that team, the student satellite team, directly learning from these scientists really helped give me a feel for how tough it is to actually work on hardware, but also on hardware that needs to work in the vacuum of space in high temperature, low temperature conditions, with no one to communicate with it seamlessly. But then in my second year of college, I stumbled into the room of a senior that was writing something about the Hyperloop on his whiteboard. And given that a lot of us used to follow Elon at the time, and Hyperloop was one of the things that had popped up, we got to talking and realized that SpaceX has this competition that they're creating. They have built a mile-long vacuum tube at their headquarters in Los Angeles. And there was an open challenge to teams around the world to build that Hyperloop pod or vehicle that could travel at really fast speeds. And we ended up applying to that. We got through the design stage. To our surprise, to be honest, we decided to participate to be able to get a chance to meet Elon. But once we got through the design stage, we went through the next stages, and finally we became one of the 20 finalists globally out of 2,500 global applicants to be able to manufacture it. And we couldn't do that where we were studying. So BITS is situated in Rajasthan, in Pilanis. It's almost a desert town, so there's nothing really around that area. So we had to come down to Bangalore which was the aerospace hub to actually work with partners to realize that. And thankfully, with a lot of support, and in 3 months, around 20 to 30 undergraduate students actually managed to pull off the funding, actually managed to pull off the manufacturing, and take this pod all the way to Los Angeles. And we were competing mainly with teams that were either postgraduates or graduates. We were the only undergraduate team there. And that imbibed a lot of things in that we as a country have a lot of young talent, and all you need is a dedicated, small, focused team that has a vision in mind that can actually execute on these things. And the Hyperloop experience was very pivotal in that. But while we were there at the SpaceX factory, they took us on a tour there and looking at the rocket engines being built, looking at the booster that had landed back. That's when it crystallized in my mind that, hey, I've always loved space. I want to work in space for the rest of my life. And how can I do that? Can I work at SpaceX? Can I work at NASA? Can I work at ISRO? And came back from there, looked at a variety of different ways in which we could contribute as students. And there's not a lot of things that you can do as students because most of the things in space technology require a lot of money. But there were a few things that were accessible. For example, satellite imagery has been coming down from the skies openly for the past 3 decades now. And we have nowhere near cracked the opportunity that is there in terms of what you can extract from there. But I think that's where we realized that there was essentially an issue or an opportunity more so. And we just quickly share the screen here. I hope you're able to see this. Is that existing satellites, they were blind to a lot of global problems still. You can see things, you can go on Google Earth and you can see how things are doing, but you can't look at whether there's invisible crop diseases, and that's a cause for a lot of harm to food production. Or we still can't detect at scale different kinds of oil leaks and gas leaks. We still can't detect where the emissions for pollutants are coming from. And the difference wasn't just the kind of imaging that was there. So the opportunity was that there needed to be a better class of satellites that could actually, first of all, see these problems. And then once you see those problems is when you can start formulating solutions to these problems. So instead of only seeing basic crop health, which is what the satellite constellations and companies enable you to do today, we wanted to be actually able to see, what is the soil nutrient content? Are there invisible crop disease or pest infestations that are there? Instead of only knowing that here's an oil and gas pipeline, what's the leakage that's occurring from any of these pipelines? Or if you're looking at different cities, what are the chemicals that are contained in our water bodies? What are the gases that are there in the air above our cities? And that's something that you still couldn't see at the level of detail. And that was the genesis for Pixxel. We said, we've started with analysis of this data, but there's possibility to actually launch a better kind of satellite, a different kind of satellite that adds to what's already there, that builds on top of what companies and organizations have done for the past few decades to build the world's first hyperspectral satellite constellation. And the hyperspectral part is what would enable us to look at these things in this much detail, and the constellation part would do it globally, daily. And the one advantage I think of India, as I mentioned, is ISRO is known for its cost effectiveness. The Mars mission that ISRO sent to the planetary body Mars, that cost less than it took to make the movie The Martian. So that really tells you in terms of how we have really tried to punch above the weight in terms of the cost, especially in a very cost-intensive business like space. And that's something that we thought we could leverage without compromising on the quality to make it more accessible to more smaller organizations, to almost anyone that wanted to use this. So I think that's a big bonus that sort of comes out of here. In the most basic sense,
Awais, let me stop you for a second and ask you, first of all, hyperspectral imaging. What do you mean by hyperspectral? I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's 3 kinds of imaging we talk about when we talk
about very briefly, okay?
Yeah. So everything that we see with our eyes is information in 3 channels: red, green, and blue. Everything that you're seeing on your screen is a combination of red, green, and blue pixels. So that's 3 information channels that we usually take information in. The satellites that are up there today are multispectral in nature. So that's about 10 information channels on average. Yeah. An example would be the night vision goggles that the Army uses, right? You're able to see the heat signature in the night, but it's still limited. But hyperspectral is information across the entire visible and infrared channel, hundreds of these wavelengths. You're moving from 3 channels that our eyes can take in to about hundreds of channels that this camera can take in, which is what leads to this difference that you can see. You can see algal blooms there, you can see what the crops are, etc. So that's what hyperspectral is. That's the gap that we sort of wanted to bridge, which leads us to what we are trying to do, to build a health monitor for the planet. What these things will enable us to do is see some unseen problems. We can detect them, we can monitor them and predict them. So that's sort of about us. And when we started in 2019, the space ecosystem in India was only limited to the public sector. There was no policy, there was no guidance for a private company to actually do this. In fact, I remember we called up the Indian Space Research Organization to ask them if we are working on a satellite, can you launch this for us? And they said that if you're an Indian company, we don't really have a pathway to doing that. But if you're a foreign company, we can do that easily, which didn't make sense, right? I mean, it should have been easier as an Indian company to launch with India. But that's changed, thankfully. I think in 2020, the government announced the privatization of space, which led to a lot of proliferation of space companies now. So that was one of the factors for specifically space companies coming up. The other reason was, I think, the global successes in generally hardware companies. We have fundraised in 2019, we have fundraised in 2020, we have fundraised in 2021. And in each of those 3 years, you've sort of seen the evolution for how generally the atom startups or the hardware startups are looked at. There were very, very few funds that were willing to actually back even a hardware startup, let alone a space hardware startup. Few very specialized firms started coming to their own in 2020, so it became a little easier for the early stage to start raising this. And we saw a lot more hardware companies come up, whether that's brain-computer interfaces, whether that's space technology, whether that's something else in hardware. And finally, I think in 2021, we've been seeing even the major investors like Lightspeed and Sequoia and Accel really look at some of these hardware investments, which would have been unthinkable, sort of, at least for the Indian parts of these VCs to look at in 2019 or before. So that's sort of how it's been changing. We still are at a stage where the early stage funding is relatively sorted, but we still don't have anyone here that can look at very large amounts of rounds that usually hardware companies require. That still requires sort of building a global network of investors that can come in and invest here. So let me just stop there. That's the broad gist of where we see the ecosystem and what we're trying to do. But happy to answer any questions you have.
I think that's great. If let's spotlight all of our speakers right now. And
I just want to say that Awais is all of 24 years old, I think. Am I right?
24, yeah.
And when I met Gaurav, he was 25 as well.
Yeah. So I think that, first of all, I want to kind of go back to you, Paula, and ask about growth, because, certainly this is what an investor is going to be most interested in, right? The growth of the value of the company. And as somebody who went to Stanford and as somebody who has been active in India for a long time, okay, I'll be frank and say that I'm pulling something from one of the students' comments from one of our previous weeks. How do you see the Silicon Valley model, the Silicon Valley kind of interest in growth? How did that have to be different? Was it very different than India? And also, is it different, in your opinion, looking at a deep tech company from an ed tech company?
Yeah, Richard, if you remember when we did ATI in 2004, I think, the theme was, can India be the Silicon Valley, right? Can India emulate Silicon Valley? That was the theme. And, we had pointed out gaps which were, which made this very different ecosystem. And I think some of those gaps still remain, but we are bridging them fast. So the Silicon Valley model of growth that I've seen, from Stanford and from Sandhill both, is that of quick scaling, building, build fast, fail fast, build fast, scale fast, right? And we have different pieces of the puzzle all there in the Silicon Valley. We have the best of the minds there. We have the best of the technologies. We have the best of the people. And we have the entrepreneurial spirit. It's okay to fail and move on. And you can build teams faster. I think the missing piece in India, especially for hardware, I'm just going to take off on what Awais said and what we thought when we were looking at investing in him. Firstly, taking technology from college and commercializing it and then scaling it was a pipe dream. We've had very few hardware companies. In fact, it's very difficult to name who have done the whole route. Whereas if while I was at Stanford in applied physics, in my own lab, there were 3 companies, which were commercializing. We have several all the time in hardware. And that piece was missing because we didn't have the ecosystem. The regulatory framework, like Awais said, ISRO said, we don't do it for Indian companies. If you built a product in India, hardware product, it was much harder to sell it even within India. So the Silicon Valley model of scaling and commercializing technologies was a missing piece. In terms of other sectors like EdTech and what Gaurav talked about, building products quickly, I think the whole interest in software and in coding that young people have developed over the years is sort of similar to the Silicon Valley model of thinking that let me just build something fast. And I think that lent itself well for people like Gaurav, who said, let me code and get up to speed, and then I can build anything on the backs of software. And so that actually, the product thinking started coming. However, till I think 2014 or 15, we really had no even software products coming out of India of global quality. We've only had services, coding was driven by services. So both in hardware and software, we lacked the product thinking or we lacked the commercial thinking, which gives the kind of scale that Silicon Valley allowed or enabled. So what has happened in the last few years is a lot of pieces have come together. I think entrepreneurial ecosystem has permeated the spirit. So students like Gaurav and Awais from their college days are thinking product, they're thinking scale. And I think that is plugging the gap. And I think we are looking at scaling much like Silicon Valley, and investors are saying we can probably get exits even though we bet early on things we don't know how they're going to pan out. Because I think the bet is on the ability of founders to build products.
Thank you. Gaurav, what was the hardest thing about growing in your example for Unacademy?
Today, investors in India are still fine with taking bigger bets when companies are not making money. But I think the hardest part was we had 1 or 2 investors on our board who would be fine with us not making money for the first 4 years. But it's usually unheard of for an Indian company to not make money and still get to a valuation of $200 million. It happens, but it happens rarely. So I think, and there were a lot of naysayers, etc. So I think not doing the conventional things, because everyone in education was making money from day one. EdTech and education in general in India assume that you will be making money from day one. So I think that was kind of the hardest path, because people would ask that you can make money, why are you not making money? They would not understand that we would want our platform to be a certain way and our product to be a certain way before we start making money. So I think that was probably relatively the hardest part.
Okay. Let me just point out that we'd like to ask our audience on Zoom if you would ask your questions using the chat window in Zoom. For students, you can ask questions by raising a hand and I'll recognize you, okay? So one more question from me for everybody. And this is really, how do you see India as coming out of the COVID situation? What do you think is going to be different about growth from this point on? Paula?
You know, I think COVID has really put digital transformation at the center. It is also, like I showed in my first slide, it has shown that we can grow exponentially if there is an opportunity. I think what was stopping us from growth was, I mean, two or three things. One is enabling ecosystem, also people. It was very difficult to get for, I'm sure, Awais and Gaurav, particularly as a large team, it has been very difficult to hire people to, to join startups, which has completely changed. I think over the last 2 years, campus placements are going more and more towards startups. So I think post-pandemic, people recognize that it's easy to work from anywhere. It's good to be part of the growth story. So that has been one. I think people have also become very conscious of the fact that, we can be hit with anything, right? So we can't be stagnant. So large corporates have realized the need to be innovative, and hence the partnerships, they're looking to partner with startups, which really was not existing at all. So I think all of non-tech or traditional companies are looking at startups. And I think the biggest change has been that people have seen the impact. I mean, there's these, memes or cartoons going around, somebody on a EV bike with delivering food from a food tech startup, holding an app which is tracking something, doing payments while doing test prep himself or herself. I think that has changed. I think, like I mentioned, people are also very conscious of what health and climate are very important, and companies are adopting at scale. So Awais has some very good use cases of how climate data is going to be used, and in sectors like education and health, access to tier 3, tier 4 rural has become so easy, and people are recognizing you don't all have to be in cities like it has all over the world. I think the spirit has changed. I think we've become very resilient, but also very aggressive on growth.
Thank you. We have a question from Rekha online, Rekha Kama, who is asking, what do you think of the role that accelerators and incubators have played in the Indian ecosystem? Let me put that to Paula first.
We need more of this, and maybe Awais can throw some light on it, because, for hardware particularly, I think we need, or for difficult sectors like climate, we do need more. We have the top institutions like the IITs, even BITS. I think we have incubators that are fairly good. I have invested in several companies out of them. And the incubation of ideas and commercialization is happening. But again, that's a gap, Richard, in India. I think we still don't have all the pieces. I think even as investors, we want much more ready khichdi, as we call it, the ready soup to boil. And like Gaurav said, we want revenue model, we want business model, and innovative tech entrepreneur, for example, doesn't have all the answers at the early stage. We should let them experiment, get supported through accelerators. We need more sector focused. I think fintech has had some good ones in India, but we do need more sector focused incubators and accelerators. What we are seeing is founders turning investors. I know Gaurav and I share some portfolio companies. They, in effect, act as mentors who would actually be part of incubators or accelerators, because they've been there. We need these kind of founders to be part of accelerators and incubators. I think more work to be done there, and we should emulate the Valley model here and get more commercialization push from top institutions. And maybe Awais and Gaurav, you can add some about this.
I think, we ourselves went to an accelerator when we just started out. So we were kids out of college. no experience of learning how to build a business. So having a structured program where people who have been there, done that, tell you what has worked, what has not, and give you some level of guidance in which direction you need to go, what are the pitfalls that you need to avoid, definitely are helpful. And I think they become even more important, especially in a country like India, where you have a lot of these entrepreneurs and students, especially trying to start up from metro cities and non-metro cities. They might not have access to how to do this or the network, and these incubators or accelerators become good ways for building that foundation and then connecting into the larger network of the ecosystem, providing a lot of confidence at the early stages. So if you want the ecosystem to grow, apart from the founders themselves becoming angel investors and helpers, having accelerators for different kinds of focused areas, just it helps. The more startups we can create, the better the growth will be, and incubators are definitely a conducive way to do that.
Hold on just a second. In the room, go ahead.
Thank you, Paula, Gaurav, and Awais for taking the time to speak with us. My name is Rhythm. I'm a software studying computer science, and I have a question for Gaurav. So marketplace products are, I guess, notorious for having difficult supply side issues. So Uber, for example, had a hard time getting drivers. And I'm curious around Academy, in the early days when you guys weren't monetizing, how did you go about getting good content creators, good teachers on the platform? Because that seems critical to success. Yeah.
Okay. Our question is for Gaurav. Rhythm asks, in the early days, how were you able to get the great teachers on the platform? Because that's the hardest part.
I'm sure all of you must have read the essay by Paul Graham, which says, do things that don't scale. I think in the first 6 to 12 months, literally the founders of Unacademy were calling every teacher themselves. And that's how we got the first 100 teachers. But after that, the educator app that we launched made sure that the pitch was very, very clear. And instead of getting the people who were already famous or who were already big YouTubers, we would try and find people who have the potential to be good. For example, somebody who had just cleared the examination. Let's say somebody who had just cracked the UPSC examination. We would call them, and these people have never created a video in the past, and we would tell them to start creating content. So we would find these potential content creators and we would launch them on our platform and they would do really well. So in a way, we focused on the people with potential who were not already out there rather than get the ones who were already pretty famous.
But Gaurav, this is very hard to get people to pay money for people who are not already well known, right?
So this is the first 4 years. This is in 2019, some of these people had already become big because see, in the first 4 years, it was a free platform. So if you have a person who cracked an examination, creating free content, that's good enough for consumers to come. In 2019, we started obviously getting the high-paying teachers, etc., for the paid model, where we are the highest paymasters for educators. Some of our educators are paid over $2 million per annum, $2 million US. So this is post 2019.
Okay, thank you. We have a question that was for Awais earlier in the chat message. Now that we have I'm sorry, I've lost it. Things are coming in chat too quickly. Hold on just a second. The question is, now that we have InSpace, all cap, do you see more kind of opportunities for space-related ventures? Go ahead.
Yeah, so I think just setting the context, InSpace is the new regulatory body that is responsible for privatization of the space sector. So the issue to date was that ISRO was an operator in the space technology domain in the sense that it was selling rockets and satellite data, which was in direct conflict with it also being a regulator of the space sector, where there would be private companies that would be then building rockets and building satellites to sell satellite data. So you can't be an operator and a regulator in the same space, which is why InSpace was the new entity that was set up. And I think it's looking promising right now. So there's a single window or an organization that different private companies can reach out to get things moving, whether that's access to testing facilities, access to customers within the sector, and just making sure that there's clarity in policy. So I think, yes, I think that's going to really speed up the rate at which new companies come up, and also, the speed at which the existing companies can leverage existing infrastructure and experience that ISRO has built for the past few decades.
This is a question from Paula. What were the biggest challenges in building a hardware company in terms of sourcing components and also assembling and testing, especially in India?
So I think I touched upon that very briefly, in the sense that the infrastructure that ISRO has set up in the country is something that the private companies can leverage. It's similar to how SpaceX in the US still leverages the Kennedy Space Center launch facilities. They didn't have to build out an entire launch pad of their own for them to launch their rockets. They could just take it to an existing launch center in Florida, and then launch from there. Similarly, in our case, given that ISRO as a space agency for the past 5-6 decades has set up its own rocket facilities, satellite manufacturing and testing facilities, we can just build on that. But we really struggled, especially when COVID hit, for procuring some components, like a lot of folks did globally. So the manufacturing for electronic components for space is a very niche thing. It's not at the volumes that you usually see in other consumer electronics and whatnot. And given that the priority that the foundries had, or the manufacturing plants had, shifted even lesser for building these niche products, so timelines were a little bit delayed. We were almost a year late in launching our satellite to space. We were supposed to launch it mid last year, and then we ended up launching it on April 1st this year. So I think that definitely led to delays, but India thankfully has a good enough ecosystem that has been set up in terms of the supply chain as well. And some things you do need to get from international, but it's, I would say, yes, we faced trouble during COVID, but it's coming back now.
Thank you. Gaurav, it must have been really difficult to have moved from being completely open and free to being something where you're charging revenue as well. Tell us about that. What was that like?
We never stopped our free platform. The free platform continued to exist when we launched the paid subscription. We just made sure that the live classes are a part of the paid subscription. So even till today, our YouTube videos that are free out there, as a traction strategy, we run 300 YouTube channels, which do collectively over 400 million views a month. And to put things in context, the largest YouTube channel in India, the music channel, does around 3 billion. So we are at around 400 million in pure education. So, and that acts as a strong top of the funnel for us. And then, let's say 4 or 5% of users will convert to paid users.
So I'm curious, what do you see as the kind of biggest challenges in moving outside India? Gaurav, for you, that's must be interesting to have moved into the US test preparation market.
See, you earlier asked the questions that, how the ecosystem will evolve. And yeah, I'll mix that question and this one and then answer. I think the biggest opportunity for Indian entrepreneurs right now is to build SaaS products for the world. This whole IT services industry, which in India collectively is $1 trillion industry, if you combine the valuations of all IT services players, this will transform into the next gen SaaS companies, which will build for the world. Freshworks is an example, but we will see more and more companies like that. So I think I think, I was in college when I was sure that after college I would want to come to San Francisco and build products for the world. But today that's happening from Bangalore. Like there is this company called Turnip, which is a gaming platform, which gets 50% of its users from outside India, a consumer product that is being built in India. So I think more than anything, it's the mindset. And I was fortunate to do a Zoom call with Mr. Reed Hastings a couple of months back, where he told me one interesting anecdote about launching internationally. He said that people think that you just create a team and within a few months revenue will start coming. He said that before launching, we send our team to the country to spend 2 to 3 years there before we expect anything out of that. So I think having a very long-term view is important. So that's why we sent our team to US for a couple of months, even before starting to expect any revenue. And I think if we are if Indian entrepreneurs are building for the world, that can be completely game changing. And it will happen more, especially in SaaS startups. And then, hopefully Unacademy will do it for consumer internet also.
Thank you. Question from the students.
For Munjal, yes, I have a question for Paula. I think you just blockchain upskilling platform. So I'm wondering what metrics you do for like investing in a startup.
Paula, what metrics are you looking at when investing in a startup?
In general? Any early stage startup?
Early stage, okay.
Right. So, very early stage, there is really no metric to see, no metric to audit. When we saw Gaurav or Awais, it was on future. So the metric we were looking at is first and foremost entrepreneur. Second one is the sector. And again, for example, in Awais's case, the sector did not exist. In Gaurav's case, I think EdTech was already a sector, but his model was totally different. So the second one we look at is what kind of model is possible. But the metric we really then track is based on what they want to build and how we are going to be measuring those milestones. So we do put up a metric in terms of internally on how soon they will be, for example, having a product market fit, or how soon they will reach the numbers that they are saying they will reach. In early stage, we also put a metric of fundraise, because usually the ability of the founder to raise the funds. If it's a company which already has some traction, depending on the sector, we will put strong matrices on, let's say, unit economics, customer acquisition costs. If it's a B2B, then the sales cycle, how long that will be. So more traditional. So when we do a little bit later stage, we put up some of these things based on the sector. But we also look, from our exit point of view, we will see in that sector, we will go backwards and see, how much money do you think they will have to raise? How much will they have to dilute? And at that point, what kind of valuation they will get? But let me tell you, let me be frank, as early stage investors, a lot of this is on future, right? We are betting on something they will do in the future. So it is not cookie cutter at all. I think the way you evaluate early stage companies is on a case-to-case basis. You really have to bet on the founders, not only on the founders' ability and background, but their passion and commitment and their overall understanding of that sector. You don't really want somebody who doesn't have any connect with the sector. So I think we really put early stage matrices are very different. They're not so quantitative. A lot of them are qualitative. The quantitative ones we will put, of course, in terms of some around valuation and so on. But I think with both of these, for example, as Gaurav knows, it was just on what their ability to at some point make revenue and create value. Same thing with Awais, the ability of the team to deliver on what they really believed in building, and launching and then delivering the data. And then from then on, we will of course have matrices on. And Gaurav, Awais, they both share their ARRs, their expenses, their funds in the bank, and how they will continue to scale.
Thank you. Have a question for Gaurav. How do you see the Indian traditional education system changing along with the advent of online education and edtech companies?
So there are three major sectors. One, you have the K-12 school education. I think there is little that tech can do there. Honestly, the consumer startups that have been claiming to do something in K-12 are all fluff. You can do push sales, you can sell supplemental education, etc. But it's like door-to-door selling of encyclopedias that used to happen 20 years ago. What you can build there is you can build products to make schools better. So, for example, there's this company called Lead School, and they are building software and curriculum, and they are providing that to make schools better. And at scale, if somebody does that, the impact that they can create for education is huge. Because see, kids don't really want to study after school. They want to come home and they want to play. And they don't want to study. So the better we can make the primary education system, the school, the better it is for all of us. We acquired a 7.5% stake in a company called Orchid Schools, which sort of takes over schools and sort of acts as a management company to it and runs the schools in sort of like an OYO model. And we see that the change that they bring to schools is huge. So I think I'm in K-12, the traditional schools will continue to exist. Entrepreneurs can make the school system better. And it's a huge opportunity because, India has a lot of young students, and if we can impact their life, that's good. Test prep, most test prep examinations are when you are in college, let's say UPSC, CAT, CLAT, etc., except JEE and NEET, which happen when you are in school in 11th and 12th standards or as early as 10th standards. Now, again, if we apply the jobs to be done theory, if you have intrinsic motivation, then online education is the best. We have seen that we have a product called Prep Ladder for the NEET PG market, where doctors are preparing to give examinations that will help them become postgraduates. We have a 24% market share for that, where people don't want to go offline.
Yeah.
They want an online product where they can learn from.
Yeah.
But
that's great.
But when it's a college experience, or when you are in school and you want to crack JEE and NEET, you also need discipline as a product, because you are not so especially for preparing for JEE and NEET, it's a product for parents also as much as it is for students, because most students are not intrinsically motivated to study 4 or 5 hours a day or 6 hours a day or 7 hours a day. So, and then the third market, which I think will be in the next 10 years, the biggest opportunity, because, Unacademy will win the test prep market, and K-12 market will be won by the schools and traditional schools. The market that's remaining, which is huge, which is like, I would say it is 5x, 10x bigger than the test prep market, is this whole job tech. We like to call it job tech. We essentially internally say that college is a job tech product. And this whole disruption of colleges and this whole disruption of college degrees will happen in the next 20 years. I mean, at least in my lifetime, I want to say that can you make degrees irrelevant for at least the bottom 97% of colleges? Like, let's say, because at the end of the day, except the Stanfords and IITs and Harvards of the world, except the top 3% of the world, the 97% colleges are selling status and credentials and not providing good education and not providing good placements. So
That's great.
one of my
Thank
life's
you.
goal is to make degrees irrelevant. And if you just have a platform which gives you a score, and it does not matter if you scored poorly in one exam, and even if you're 35 or 40 years old, and you want to change your career, you go to this platform, you give an exam, you prepare for it, and you can become a data scientist without ever giving a fuck about what degree, what college you went to, or what degree you have, etc.
Very well said. We have another question from the students.
I have a couple questions about Pixxel. I'm curious first who the customers are, how much they're paying and for how long to use this satellite. And then also moving forward, when you shared the screen, it showed that it scans the Earth every 24 hours. And I'm curious if there is a need to scale up, or if you foresee a need to scale up and potentially launch more satellites, or if the one is likely good enough.
So the first question for Pixxel is, who are your customers?
So there's essentially two sectors. There's the government. There's the governments and the departments and the organizations within the government that will be big procurers of data, and then there are the private companies. The sectors that we deal with are predominantly agriculture, environment, oil and gas, and mining. Some use cases would be, there's a fertilizer company that wants to know whether a particular area of soil has this nutrient or not, so that they can provide a fertilizer that can then help cater to the lack of a nutrient in a particular place. If there are food management companies, they're growing millions of acres of crops around the globe to be able to see how these crops are changing, how the health is changing, are there any infestations, is the irrigation level fine or not. So I think that's one. Then you have oil and gas companies that keep a track of the pipelines and seeing if there's any leakages somewhere, because you can't always send people to remote areas like in Alaska or the deserts. Or you're looking at gas processing and oil processing plants to see if there's any leakages and emissions that are occurring, because there have to be certain regulatory boundaries within which they operate. And then you have a lot of forestry and sustainability and the carbon economy based use cases where, for example, we can help identify the amount of carbon that is being stored in a particular area of a forest. Or if someone is saying that we're going to plant these many trees to offset our carbon emissions, how much carbon is that area actually storing? So these would be some of the customers, and then similar use cases, but from a government standpoint, whether the Department of Agriculture is looking at it, or the Department of Oil and Gas is looking at it. So that's the use cases.
Okay, I'm afraid that we're really about out of time for the main section, but I do have one last question for Awais, and that is, do you see many more space tech startups coming from India?
Absolutely, I think absolutely. There were about 5 companies in 2019 when we started. Now there are about 15 in these years, and I'm pretty sure by the next years there will be about 50 to 100. One reason I mentioned obviously is that the government itself has said that, look, we're privatizing the space and we're going to help private companies actually leverage what has been built and take off. And secondly, we have seen global success stories in space. SpaceX has shown that you can build a really, really valuable business in space technology. And you have other successful examples like Rocket Lab in the US. You have Planet Labs and Maxar. So I think success stories and a combination of the privatization and the government support will lead to a lot more.
Okay. Well, I'm afraid that we're out of time for the regular course, but if you can stay for a few more minutes, we'll stop the recording now. But before we do that, thank you so much to our panelists from India. Thank you very much, everyone.